right, we'll get started here. I think we have all the board members here and we have our special guest here. I will share the agenda real quick. There's not a lot there. So basically, this is to discuss the economic tax abatement and possibly set the hearing date. And I do have here. There we go. So I have the agenda up here and I do have the public hearing notice that Ryan had shared with us, if that's the direction we go. And the other information also in the folder here that I can pull up if there's other information you need to see. So I will turn it over to board chair to start the workshop. It's pretty informal. So I guess if there's any questions, I know I sent out some information to the board regarding questions that you needed answered. And I sent that out. So one of the questions was, how much does the school already receive in tax revenue from the grocery store? And the information I have, there's 4 parcels and there's different amounts on there, but it's about just under 4,500. Per year. What is the impact on the budget? And basically on a $6.9 million yearly budget, the 5688 is not a significant part of that. But as far as our general property tax revenue for fiscal year 19, for example, our local tax revenue was about $780,146. So it's about 0.72%. And then the 15-year period, it'd be a total of 85,000. The county, the information I have is that they're meeting on the 16th. And Crystal can speak to this. And they're looking at approving a tax abatement for 5 years, but that's to be discussed at that meeting, I believe. So that's what I was told, but I wasn't confirmed. So I don't know if Ryan has more information on that.
Yeah, the county is going to have a special county board meeting. Actually, it's going to be right before our EDA meeting. It's going to be Wednesday at 5 p.m. They are looking at taking action on a 5-year. That's said within the discussion. They're not tied to anything right now, but that's going to be their workshop, very similar to this meeting. But just kind of the consensus going into that kind of reading the tea leaves, I think they're going to go with 5 years.
Yeah. Now, at one time, Ryan, you had talked about doing a 5-year and then like and maybe I misunderstood. After 5 years, reconsider it and have it up for discussion again, up to a total limit, or is that not advisable?
I'll tell you what, I invited Michaela here to join me. She is a consultant with Baker Tilly and has been working with the city. Now, the way I read it, it looks like there are some options to not define the term right out of the gate, and then you have up to 8 years total on that. But there might be some more nuance to that. I would love for her to answer that question.
Yep.
I think we'll probably have to unmute her as a guest.
That says ask to unmute.
It wouldn't be a distance meeting without a mute issue coming into play.
Always. the button I have says ask to unmute, so it's not letting me.
Okay.
Can everyone else unmute?
No, can you hear me now?
There, we got you. Yep, I can hear you.
I apologize. So my video is not working. So when I tried to start the video, then I locked up so I could hear you. You couldn't hear me. So, but as Ryan said, so yes, so Michaela Hewitt with Baker Tilly, and I was just kind of going through the tax information on this property. So if you could ask kind of going through the questions, but if you could ask the more specific question, make sure that I've got that.
Yeah, Michaela, the question was, can you set a preliminary term and revisit the abatement after so if the school board said tonight we want to set a preliminary term of 5, could they revisit that in 5 years, or are they set with whatever they agree to today?
Oh, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things to think about. I think, one tonight is to gain information on tax abatement, on the tool, on the term. And so the maximum term, I'll just go through it, but the maximum term that you could consider is up to 15 years if all 3 taxing entities participate. So the city, county, and school. So if the city had already agreed to participate, the county is likely 5 years. The maximum term that we're looking at is 15 years. Once you go through the process and actually establish the tax abatement, so if tonight's the work session, then you have the holding of the public hearing, which will be at a determined date. At the time that you hold the public hearing and establish the abatement, then that's the max, that's the term that you can set. There's no back-to-back abatements. You have to wait 8 years. So whatever term that you decide now is pretty much it for at least 8 years on the specific property. But so that long-winded answer is you have time between now and the public hearing to establish your term. But once you adopt the resolution that indicates the terms, then you can't abate on that property again for 8 years.
Okay. So by setting it at 5 years, 5 years it goes up, then the abatement would expire, and you couldn't do anything until 3 years after that.
8 years actually 8 years after it ends. So
8 years
at
after it
13 years. Yep.
Okay.
So 5 years would basically be done.
5 years and done then probably. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And so right now that the tax abatement that's before you is based on, if any of you are familiar with tax increment financing, it's based on the same premise of tax increment financing where we're only focusing on the incremental taxes from this project and not anything that you're currently receiving.
So what would be the impact, let's say 2 years down the road, the district does an operating referendum? What would the impact be on the abatement with that?
So this is where I know school formulas are a lot more complicated than city and county formulas. We've done a few school district tax abatements, and so my understanding, and we can certainly follow up with this additional information because we have people on our team that work exclusively with school districts to address the question. But what we're in my simplistic version is we're focusing on the tax abatement portion of it. So, or I'm sorry, the property tax portion of it. And so with the incremental, the way that it would be structured is the incremental taxes that would be generated from this project. If you did not do the abatement, they would be added to your existing tax capacity base for property taxes, which would be used to calculate your tax rate. With the tax abatement, what you would do is add a levy that's the same amount of that increase, and that levy would be used then to help finance this project, meaning that all things equal, if your levy stayed the same, your tax base is also staying the same. And if you wanted to increase your levy with the tax base staying the same, that could impact your tax rate. So it's that calculation between the tax rate, the tax capacity value, and then with this project, by redirecting it, you're not adding it to your general tax base. So it's a different formula as opposed to the other side of the equation with the referendum. Now, one thing I will add though, with the referendum market value tax, any value increase that is part of the referendum market value tax, that would actually, the taxes would go up because that's not captured by the tax abatement. So if the values are going up and that generates the referendum market value taxes, the value growth from this project, you'll see that in the increased taxes of the business.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Discussion?
I've got a question, Jeff.
I can hear you.
Okay. So I'm just curious, and Ryan or Michaela can answer that. This commitment to 5 years, and I'm a fence straddler at heart. I just want to see how this pans out. I don't necessarily want to put us in a bind financially, 15 years down the road, but I also want to embrace the fact that somebody's trying to do something positive for the community, which we need. How does somebody who wants to straddle that fence look at a 5-year commitment and then knowing that I can't revisit that in 5 years? Is there an alternative to that? Because after 8 years after the original expiration, really that's going to be out of the hearts and minds of the people of the debt 13 years down the road. So is 5 years just a compromise position for me to take and let's just do it? Or do we look further down the road?
I'll give you I have a philosophical answer, and then I'll let Michaela give you the technical answer. I think, as you said, when we were first looking at this project, I think in the city, correct me if I'm wrong, Michaela, the city today approved a 10-year tax abatement, or at least a public hearing for a 10-year tax abatement. The county, as I said, they're likely to go 5 years, and I think, to be honest, I can't tell you why they chose to go 5 years. It was a little bit surprising to me. And as you said, it's not every day somebody invests $3 million into downtown Baudette. If I had to guess why the county, maybe there were some county board members who felt that this is more of a city project, if you will. But this is the only grocery store in the county. It's the only grocery store in the school district. And so that's why I was advocating for a 10-year. I certainly understand that some of you won't be sitting in the seats that you're at right now after 5 years, and there might be other people, and they're going to have to inherit the decisions you make. But I can just tell you, I wouldn't come to your board asking this lightly, and that I understand that that's a big commitment.
And I'll just add on, with tax abatement, while there's a fair amount of flexibility for using the tool, there's just a couple of parameters that have to be decided upon in the resolution and the adopting resolution. And another way to, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, and is 5 years enough, or do you get to 5 years and they're struggling? You can also, once you have an agreement, it's hard to go back unless somebody defaults. And like in this case, you can't extend the abatement on this project, but you could also look at it of a maximum number of years and or dollar amount. And so, if they hit the number of years and or that dollar amount first, then it could be shut off. And so, I mean, that's that's the hardest part, is kind of crystal balling and see how, the future holds for them. And I think, part of the 10 versus 5-year term is they are making an investment up front, and they're looking for, as they kind of ramp up, as they absorb the investment they made and ramp up sales to offset that. That's where generally we see some requests for property tax relief, at least in the early years, to sort of help them with their cash flow. And then once they get stabilized post renovation and improvements, then hopefully they're going strong. So that's part of the discussion on at least the early years of helping provide some relief for that. But the only point of that is that there's flexibility for how, once it's in there, that's kind of the maximum amount, but you could look at it, and some taxing entities, just for reference, have provided 100% for 5 years or 50% for 10 years or some, percentage of there. So there's different ways, or specific dollar amount. So there's with again, the tool, there's some flexibility once you define what the parameters are that you want to work within.
So you could do 100% for 5 years and then drop it to 50% the following 5 years. Am I following that correctly, or is that
Yep.
too simple?
Nope, that's exactly. I mean, you have that flexibility to structure it that way.
Do we have any history in the area on tax abatement at the county level, school district, or the city level?
Not, I believe the city has done some TIF districts before, which is, if you remember from our first conversation, we were originally looking at using tax increment financing for this. Very, very similar tool. It essentially captures the increased tax value for a portion of time and returns it to the developer to help finance the project. For a variety of reasons, this project isn't TIF eligible, but tax abatement eligible. I know of one TIF project outside of the city, and that it was about 10 years ago, there was a resort that was built on the lake that used TIF as a financing tool. Michaela, have you worked with the city at all on any other TIF projects within the city before my time?
We did one, the city did one soils correction project. And that was 2013.
So before my time with economic
Yep.
development. Yeah.
Yep, there was one. That's one I think that was their first. That was their first one.
I would say it's new for Lake of the Woods County. I think that there's a sort of a function of when you're doing these types of things, honestly, you need to bring somebody like Michaela or her organization in, because there's some technical work. You have to have projects that are big enough to sort of necessitate special financing tools. And so I think that's kind of why there hasn't been a long history in Lake of the Woods.
In some of these districts that are larger, where they're probably a lot more common, I mean, there's numerous abatements out there for that the school districts or the county are involved with.
Yeah, I happened to see, in Bemidji, where I live, there was 2 different TIFs on the city council agenda for tonight. So it's a tool, especially the larger you get as a community and the larger the project dollar gets, they tend to be a little bit more used. And I think it's just because of a sophistication and a scale of project in bigger communities.
And some of those, I mean, they are, when they were talking numerous abatements, they're starting to cost some money. I mean, for the school districts or the county, or, I mean, if they start adding up after a while. Is that correct?
I think that's fair to say. I would leave that to Michaela there.
Yeah, I think there's never a simple answer to that question. I mean, I've learned long ago there's always an impact to a decision you make, right? Whether it's positive or negative. And so you can never say there's no impact on doing a, at least in my experience, it's not safe to say there's no impact. But that being said, I think with working with cities, counties, and school districts of doing tax abatement and tax increment financing, with tax abatement, you know, as you've kind of alluded to, it's a little bit harder because each with TIF, you don't have a say in participating. So sometimes that makes it challenging. With tax abatement, when you have a say in the decision, that can be hard as well, because you know you're making a decision that as to how you're using your tax base, and you know working with projects, and but with all that, I think you know we've done some analysis, and like I said, if there's you know specific follow-ups, we can work with our team on it. That in some of these projects, while it might shift your funding formula, it doesn't necessarily have a negative impact on the school district as a whole. And so sometimes when we're looking at tax increment financing districts, while you're not getting that tax base, you might be getting that revenue from another source. So while it does impact your property tax side of the equation, it may not impact your overall formula. And that's not a blanket statement across the board, because every situation is different. But we have tried to look at that in situations to understand, you know, what the implications are to your funding, because that's obviously important, you know, to try to understand, you know, what the implications could be. So it's kind of a long response of again, saying that generally, I mean, and so while there's no impact, we try to see how, you know, with maybe if you're abating the tax capacity part of this, maybe you're benefiting from the market value referendum side of it. And so, you know, we try to look at it as a whole of what the impacts to your tax base could be in your overall revenues.
And what would that be for the school?
We would have to follow up with that information. Like I said, we haven't done the specific impacts of that, but I can certainly work with our team to understand what that could be and provide that at your next, at your next meeting or discussion.
Because Jeff, we pretty much the only funding we would have is through property tax, correct?
As far as,
Well,
Yeah.
the grocery store. I mean, we're not getting any percentage of a sales tax or anything like that. It's the benefit the school receives is strictly through the property tax.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that may
guess-
narrow it down pretty fast.
yeah. So the problem with the board is having, I think with this is that the school's budget's very tight. In fact, we've been deficit spending. And also I think in everyone's heart, they want to really help out with the local economy, because that can bite us in the rear too, if we're not supporting our local businesses and expanding economic growth. But I sense that they're really reluctant to give up revenue without having a clear idea of what the long-term impact is. I know Crystal is going to get a hold of Greg Crow at Ellers and get some input from them. What is the process for the hearing? If we set the date and stuff and consult and look at different options, I guess how firm do we have to be when we set the hearing that the board is going to step up and do this? At the hearing, can they say we're going to vote no on it, or walk us through the process for the hearing?
Sure. You certainly, yeah, I mean, at the point of the public hearing, if the board chose not to approve the abatement, they could do it. So at that time, my sense is there's maybe a cleaner way of getting there.
Yeah.
From than holding a public hearing and then kind of having a negative vote. That's that just might not be good press for anybody. My thought is, I think that if we can come to at least a ballpark consensus today, but so a public hearing notice will have to be released. It has to be more than 10 days and less than 30 days before the meeting. That public hearing notice, and I believe I shared that with Jeff, that Michaela helped draft, will outline the maximum terms of the abatement. And so, it would say, the total amount of taxes proposed debated by the district on the property is estimated not to exceed, X dollars and, over blank amount of years. And so if it was 5 years, it'd be $28,439 over 5 years. And if it was 10, it would be $56,800, $808. Similar to any sort of other like budget hearing or anything like that, you open a public meeting. At that meeting, folks are welcome to add their comments either in person or they can give them in writing to Jeff. And at that point, there'll be a resolution that outlines the terms of the tax abatement agreement, and the board would then take action on that agreement, and it would be passed in the form of a resolution. Anything I missed, Michaela?
Well, I think, to answer your question, which are completely appropriate on kind of the financial impacts and so on. I mean, if you followed your regular meeting schedule, and this was at the end of October, as Ryan said, you'd probably want to understand if you set the public hearing, that's kind of the question on your process. You probably want to have a good sense of what your thoughts were on the project. So I would suggest that, you kind of do the homework, answer the questions on the impact and so on, which I think completely appropriate and reasonable. Whether it's us or Ellers, which makes sense, that's who you work with, and make sure you have a good understanding of that. And then at that point, if you want to set the hearing and consider taking action, that might be appropriate. It's always that balance of when you have meetings and so I guess that's if you meet once a month, I think that's what the meeting schedule is, once a month.
Yeah,
so the question is, do you take action a different way, or do you bring it forward, and get additional information prior to that meeting and then decide if you want to hold it at that point or not? Or if it's a special meeting to consider it and take action, or, something like that.
Is it?
Then this question is for Michaela. Something you alluded to earlier, and I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, but you alluded to when we were talking about the terms, how it could be extended, that sort of thing. You mentioned that in the event that they're not making as much money as they thought or something like that. So is that did I hear you correctly? Is that they're not really sure if they're going to make money on this expansion?
I think with that comment in general, when a business is going through, and this one similarly, they're putting a big investment in the project, or in their business, it generally takes a few years for them to be able to, from a cash flow standpoint, to be able to generate enough revenues to pay for those improvements that they're making. So usually one of the benefits of tax abatement is in those early years when they're perhaps haven't ramped, they're going to have increased costs related to debt service financing and other costs of the project. Maybe they haven't ramped up their revenue sales yet. So it's trying to provide some property tax relief in their cash flow. So that's what I was indicating with this, or with that comment, was it's generally that just to allow them to ramp up businesses post improvements and renovation.
And would I also, what my understanding is the amount of money that he's putting into the building is not going to increase the tax. He's putting close to 3 million into this whole project, and then it's really only increasing the taxable market value about half that. Is that correct, Ryan?
That is correct. The project right now, and I actually had a conversation with the owner earlier today because we're looking at some other financing tools as well. It's going to be about $2.9 million is the latest estimate. And so, yeah, it's moving the taxable value of right now it's 574,000 and the new estimated value is 1.58 million. So yeah, it's just about double the taxable value.
It doubles the taxable value, but it's not, he's not getting his full investment for the project back in the value of the property, which is partially the reason for the request, correct?
Correct, and it's also the return on investment is part of our analysis on this. We did ask him to disclose some projections and looked at those, and based on a return on investment standpoint and that increase in property value, we felt that this was an appropriate tool. I did want to add kind of just to the point about budgets, and I absolutely feel that pressure. I think every year, anyone who's got a levy is worried about that. And just to be clear, it's not going to take the existing tax base from the school. What it would do is abate the increase. So it's that increase from about, I think, Jeff, you said it's like 4,500 now. And it would be about 9,000, 10,000 after that. So it's abating that increase in taxable based on the new estimated value. It's not taking the existing tax dollars. And frankly, the goal of something like this is to hopefully increase the property value of the neighbors, encourage other investment, and hopefully you're making that $5,800 up and an increased total property value of the community.
I don't know if this question's for Michaela or Ryan, but feel either one of you can ask. Do we see a lot of where the county and city and the school boards are all over the board on these, or is there some compliance that we see all three of them? Or I mean, do we see different ideas from everybody's different perspective on these?
I'll give a short answer and then I'll defer to Michaela because she works in more communities. I think most projects like this end up being tax increment finance eligible. And so the school district and county don't generally have a choice because the city will put a tax increment finance district together and the decision's made for them just based on that statute. Given the size and geography of Lake of the Woods too, I would say it's unique. And a lot of other communities, say this was Roseau County, you've got two larger school districts there, two sort of commercial centers in War Road and Roseau. And so they might not look at this the same way. What's good for Roseau might not be great for War Road. Where in Lake of the Woods, the city of Baudette is the primary commercial center for the community. And so there's not as much, I guess, political turf as there is in some other communities.
And I can just add to that, you know, I think as I mentioned earlier, as Ryan said, with tax increment, there is no choice. And so with tax abatement, there is a big mix of choosing to participate or not, you know, whether it's for businesses like this or infrastructure projects, which is commonly how tax abatement is used. There is it does vary. And I think it's each entity is different, as Ryan mentioned, with the
I think she just got kicked out.
We'll see if she comes back. Did that answer your question, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
One question I have that you guys have both kind of brought up, both Ryan and Michaela have mentioned numerous times that if they had used tax increment financing, we wouldn't have a choice in the matter. Why didn't you use tax increment financing?
For a couple reasons. They're all basically state statute oriented. because it's a retail store, and the size of the project both make it tough to do TIF without, and this could have been maybe a bigger picture question for the community to answer. There are certain designated blight areas that would make the size of the project and it being a retail project eligible. But there's a sort of formal process in declaring that area a blighted area of the community that this would be a great Michaela question, because there's some very firm statutes on what is TIF and what you can use it for. And generally, retail is not eligible unless it's in a blighted area, which is why they came up with tax abatement, frankly, is because TIF wasn't a perfect tool. And they came up with tax abatement after TIF had been established as a policy tool in the state of Minnesota.
Well, I can tell you for myself, the issue I have is you're asking the taxpayers to give a private business a loan, not a loan, to give them money. And you can say it however you want, that it's still the same. That really is what we're doing. We're foregoing the increase in property taxes and giving it to a business. The city and the county, quite frankly, are a little different. For the school district, we haven't done it. Very few school districts. I've looked online. There's been a few, 3 or 4 of them around the county, around the state, who have done it, but it's not something that's used very much. Overall, it's a fairly small amount of money on either side. But I think more has to do with, okay, so if we give it to this private business, whose obvious goal is to make money. I mean, they're not here out of the goodness of their heart. Their idea is to make money, and I hope they do make money. So, but let's forego that it's out of the goodness of their heart that they're here and they're doing all this. Their idea is they're going to make money. Great. That's capitalism. That's how it's supposed to work. So what happens now when Cenex needs a new parking lot or some other store wants something else? They're all going to come to this. So at least the hurdle you have to jump through to get my vote would be explained to me how this will benefit the school itself and the ramifications thereof. Because if we do this for one, now you've opened Pandora's box. And do you do it for all? Do you only do it for some? Do you do it for the ones you like? How does that work? I work in the public sector. I'm paid by county taxes, by the taxpayers, and I keep very close watch on how taxpayer money is used. And if a private entity wants something from the taxpayers, they better have a good reason why. And the taxing entities had also better have a good reason, justification as to why they give the private entity that. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's the hang up that I've got with this right now. So far, it's like, okay, it'll help the city. Well, yeah, but it's kind of, right now, in my mind, it's the cost of doing business, and they want to expand and put in a coffee shop. Well, now you're competing with another local business. So by us giving you this money, now we're directly competing with an already existing local business. And quite frankly, that's not right. You shouldn't use taxpayer money to help the competition, essentially. So, and I've heard before from other arguments, it's like, well, the parking lot's in bad shape. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the cost of doing business. That's what happens with a 30-year-old building or 20-year-old or however old it is. So that's where you're at if you want my vote, is you got to give me a very good reason why the taxpayers should be helping out a private entity and this particular private entity in this particular development.
I think that's a very fair question. I have to give you an answer that's it's hard to quantify your answer, but I can maybe try to qualify it with some reasons. You know, I've heard quite a bit, and you're asking from a school district standpoint. It's tough, and I agree that it's asking a lot. As far as kind of the first question about if we make this arrangement, how do we say no to the next one, or what is our choosing? I guess my suggestion would be, if that's something to consider looking at, maybe developing a business subsidy policy as part of this agreement. You know, what are those things that you need to see in place to even consider something like this? If that existed, first off, I can promise you, at least myself personally, I won't bring things to you that I don't think actually sort of check the boxes of significant development and sort of worthy of our time here. But if you put together some, 5 criteria that you said it's got to check at least 3 of these boxes, I think that's a very good way of at least having an intake process where you can have policy in place that says, we appreciate that you're growing as well, and that your business is going to impact the community. But these are the things we look at for even entertaining these kind of things. And that could be jobs created. It could be private investment. It could be any number of things that you do. The second kind of point about competing with an existing private business, I do appreciate that. And in fact, I helped get financing for the new coffee shop there, and especially opening in March. It's been a tough run, I imagine, and I do appreciate that. That said, a coffee shop, I think, is part of this larger project. That's also going to include it's going to be a bigger and staffed service meat counter. So they're like, there'll be cut steaks and such there. There's going to be an enhanced deli. You're looking at about, based on my conversation today, and then a Caribou Coffee drive-through shop. Between the 3 of those things, that's going to be an added 15 to 20 jobs at the business, which may employ everything from the school staff spouses to some of the students who attend the school. And frankly, it's an investment in the vitality of the community. The property tax is one thing. Families with kids and their ability to attract and retain those families in the community is a big thing. I don't know what your numbers are, but I can guess, looking at just the population trends over the last 20 years, they're not great. And so I see this as a piece of a larger puzzle about making a community that can attract and retain families to the area and also provide jobs to those people.
So what is our time frame? We've got a board meeting at the end of the month, and then October was also mentioned. And
So Ryan, we talked about this last time. Could you hear Ms. Trask?
I heard just the last part of the question. I apologize.
I'm gonna tell her to yell at the mic.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I'm just thinking about timeframes and how we move this forward. We have a regular meeting at the end of the month. I don't know that we're ready to make a recommendation tonight. Just it felt like there's some pieces missing as far as the discussions with Bailey or
Ellers.
Ellen. Sorry. Did I get that right? I got it wrong.
Ide Bailey is our accountant,
Well, them too, right? No.
probably.
So and it'd be nice not to hold another special meeting to discuss this. Is the end of October too late to have our public hearing along with our regular board meeting? Yes.
It is not too late. I'll tell you my perspective here. So as part, I mentioned today, I did talk to the developer. His indication based on the city moving forward tonight with the tax abatement on their end and the county basically calling for the public hearing next Wednesday for the 5-year agreement, was that gave him enough confidence that these were going to move forward, that he was going to break ground on October 1st. My understanding is that because it's tax abatement and not TIF, the abatement can happen after the project starts, but before the new taxable value is brought online. So if it's the end of October, that will be fine because they're breaking ground October 1st. And the project won't be complete till the end of the year. And so we still got time to do that. As Michaela mentioned, between the announcement of the public hearing and the actual public hearing, we have to have a minimum of 10 days and a maximum of 30 days. I did check in with the newspaper, just to see in case this meeting went forward, if we could squeeze it in on September 22nd. That's not going to happen, both based on their timeline and I think the conversation as it's going tonight. So October 28th is the next
26th.
October 26th. Yeah, I think if that's the way we can get to a place where people feel either confident or I guess decide to go in a different direction, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And the other thing is that would maybe just want a recap of exactly what this project entails. I know there's been a few things kicked out, parking lot, coffee shop, and maybe it's in my packet somewhere, but what exactly is this project?
You kind of want like a sources and uses and sort of project scope.
Yeah. So we know what we're saying yes to if we say yes.
Okay.
Well, there's.
What I would suggest is, so Jeff, I don't necessarily know how you want to do this. Maybe we can connect. I've got a couple things that I picked up on this conversation, kind of coming from some draft policy discussions that we can go back and forth on and come to consensus. A project recap, kind of sources and uses, some other things. And you were going to reach out to Ellers on kind of what this means for you guys financially. If we can get that information, say by, end of the month and have everyone review that, do we need to have another work session if we're going to have a public hearing on the 26th, or
Well, it's pushing it, but if we could use our regular working session on the 28th of September to bring this information to discussion before the regular board meeting, and then they could decide if they wanted to set the hearing date at the regular board meeting that happens after that working session. Does that seem reasonable? The board packet usually goes out the week before, so the board will try to get that information out like on the 24th at the latest, so the board can look at the documents and absorb it and then discuss it Wednesday, and then we can hopefully decide if we want to move forward with the hearing.
Okay. On my end, all that information exists. I can just package it in a way that makes some sense. I guess I can't speak for if Ellers and your accountants can get the information you're looking for.
Okay. I don't think that'll be a problem. We'll get on that tomorrow. I think Crystal's already sent information to them, and so.
Do we really need accountants involved with this whole thing? I mean, if you want, take $5,000, multiply by however many years you think we're gonna do
No,
this.
I want Ellers to just give us an impact, because when we start talking about referendum market value and net tax capacity, I just want to make sure that we're not impacting anything that we're not aware of. So Ellers just kind of runs that for us. I just think I'd feel better to consult with them and see what impact that would have on some of those formulas.
Okay, doesn't hurt.
But the accountant one, Bailey won't be involved.
Just to be, just so I know I've got my marching orders, a bit more information, kind of an overall project scope, sources and uses, kind of what a percentage wise, what the school district's share would be. Was sort of some draft, or at least maybe example business subsidy policy, was that of interest? I guess from the standpoint of how do you, the question was, how do you determine what project is eligible and which wouldn't be? My sense is that if you have policy, that's a pretty important thing to have for that question.
Yes, I agree. And you sent some of this in the original information, but maybe more about school policy type format. The project qualifications for tax abatement has some of those things that sets, in my mind, sets some of those criterias, but and maybe there's some others that the board would want to add to a policy so that moving forward, next time it comes up, we have boxes to check off, and if they don't meet all those boxes, it's a no deal and that type of thing.
If nothing else, I find that those sorts of things are helpful for not having somebody at least complain about something that's just not really your deal.
Yeah. Any other questions or any other information the board has or would like us to get, or? So we'll try to get that out mid to late next week, and we'll set this agenda item for the 28th at 6 o'clock.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.